with no further ado, let me introduce our first speaker. His name is Tony Hunter, and we're going to be talking about the future of food. He's a food futurist speaker, a food scientist, an author specializing in the future of food, my favorite topic. He's been with us in Prague once before, so we're super interested to see what has changed and developed. He's consulted to some global food companies. Some of you might have heard of Pepsi. Raise of hands. Pepsi. KFC. Oh, no Pepsi over here. KFC, anybody? Yeah? Yeah. He's consulted with some of them, and there's so many futurists in the world, but not many talking about food, which is such a vital part of our existence. So please welcome to the stage, Mr. Tony Hunter.
Thank you, Tilly. Thanks for that introduction. And thanks to Martin and Kati for having me at Futureport Youth. It's great to be here with you and to get to talk about my two favourite things, technology and the future. So let's leap right in. Imagine our world in 2050. There will be 11 billion entities on the planet. I deliberately say entities because beside our 9.7 billion humans, there will be 1.3 billion, yes, billion pet cats and dogs, all wanting to be fed. How we produce the 40% more food required to feed all of these entities is the question of our time. We're at a once-in-a-generation crossroads. The decisions we make in the coming years will reverberate down through the decades. So what are our crossroads choices? Well, the obvious one is business as usual. Why don't we just take what we do now and do more of it in the future? Obvious, right? Well, let's just have a look at that. At the moment, we use 50% of all of the arable land on the planet to produce food. 2/3 of that or more is used for animal agriculture in some way, shape or form. If we look at water withdrawals, 92% of all of our fresh water withdrawals are for agriculture. So, I mean, maybe, if we're only using half the arable land on the planet, who thinks we should just deforest the rest of it and grow our food? And I don't see any takers. Maybe that might not end well. So, given how much arable land and fresh water we use, how much further can we push planetary boundaries? The answer is not much further, if at all. There is no solution in simply doing more of the same. We need to change our paradigm. Our world is more like a closed environment space station, and we have to produce all of our food within planetary boundaries. So, what is the future of food actually all about? It's about filling the gap between what we can make sustainably within planetary boundaries and what we're going to need in 2050 to feed the population. And if we have a look at where we are today, there is not enough arable land or fresh water on the planet to feed the whole planet today the way you have just eaten at lunch, let alone the entire population of entities in 2050. Imagine that. Not enough arable land or fresh water on the planet. So what do we do? How do we fill that gap? How do we grow enough food? What is the solution? What is the way out of the maze? Well, there is a solution. The solution is to reimagine a global food system using technologies. Why technology? Well, you can't talk about food from farm to fork without talking about technology. Food used to be a sleepy technological backwater compared to things like the electronics industry, but no more. Technology is now everywhere in food, and every day is a new adventure in innovation. So over 8 years of obsessive research on new food technologies, I've come to the conclusion that we're approaching the intersection of 5 exponential food technologies driven by 3 accelerated technologies that will determine the future of food for decades to come. And we're going to need all of those technologies because we cannot solve today's problems using yesterday's technologies. That's why my roadmap, my model of the future of food is based on technologies. Now, it's not to say that crop agriculture and conventional animal agriculture will disappear anytime soon. Far from it. We're going to need everything in our armoury if we're going to feed our 11 billion entities by 2050. Just that these 5 technologies are going to be far more influential in determining what the future of food looks like. So what are our 5 technologies? They are alternative proteins, cellular agriculture, genomics, the microbiome and synthetic biology, and our 3 accelerators, AI, sensors, and quantum computing, all leading to our exponential food future. Now, I'm sure you're all thinking, WTF? Why a exponential future? Well, it's built on 2 key concepts. The first is that food is now technology. As I've said, you cannot separate out food from farm to fork from technology. The other thing that we know about technologies is that they advance exponentially, not linearly. So, So the thing that we need to realise, though, that exponential growth, and a great example of exponential change is personal computing or portable computing, 1975 style. My friend Mr. Robert L. Gordon here has his hand on the world's first portable computer. Now, I used to have hair like that, but that's a whole other story. Who would like to guess how much that computer, just the one he has his hands on, how much that weighed? Give me a few guesses. Shout out. How many kilos? 15? 20? It weighed 23 kilograms. Do not put that on your aircraft tray table. It will not end well. Now, fully spec'd up, this state-of-the-art machine with a printer, some offline storage, spec to the max, cost a sum of $19,750 US in 1975. That's $115,333 US in today's terms. Now, even more staggering, though, is that this top-of-the-line machine came with a storage of 64K. Not megabytes, not gigabytes, kilobytes. The latest Galaxy Z Fold 7 comes with 10 million times the storage at 1/1000th of the cost, at 1/100th of the weight, and all in just 50 years. So that is the advantage of exponential growth. So where do these concepts lead us? Food is now, technology is advancing exponentially. The future of food is exponential. Now that we've got our model, we can understand the power of these technologies to reimagine our global food system. And today we're just going to talk about the 3 of them that influence food production. And they are our alternative proteins, cellular agriculture, and synthetic biology. First of these is alternative proteins, and I'm not going to bore you with plant-based foods. But how about food from air? Actually comes from NASA research in the 1960s on how do we feed our astronauts in space without shipping thousands of tons or hundreds of tons of food products. This is a company called Solar Foods. What they do is they suck air into their proprietary machine, they separate out the water, the carbon dioxide and the nitrogen, and they split the water into hydrogen and oxygen using solar energy. That's why solar foods. They process the nitrogen, CO2 and hydrogen and oxygen, they add some microbes and they make protein. So the protein is very similar to things like soy protein or pea proteins that you would get, and they can be made into all sorts of products. They're already selling some of those products. They've got a big contract with a Japanese company called Ajinomoto, and they're selling those products now. They say they can make 10 to 100 times the amount of protein per hectare compared to soy protein. Another technology, another company here is the Leaf Protein Co. from Australia. They process green material to extract the most abundant protein on the planet, which is a protein called rubisco, which is involved in photosynthesis. Now, they say that by extracting this protein, if they treated all the green waste that we currently produce in our global food system, they could produce 11 times the protein of the entire soy protein production, all from just green byproducts. Our next technology is cellular agriculture. Now, many of you are probably familiar with cultivated meat, cultured meat. We take a few cells from an animal and you can then grow meat in huge stainless steel fermenters. Well, that's one example, but another one, you can do the same thing with plant cells. So who here likes chocolate? Anyone like chocolate? Yes. I hate to tell you, chocolate is under threat. Low yields, disease, low pollination rates, low labour costs. Our chocolate is under threat. Fortunately, our friends at California Cultured are cultivating cells from the cacao plant to make chocolate ingredients. They've just signed a big contract with a Japanese chocolate company called Meiji to supply them with cocoa ingredients. Don't worry, our chocolate is safe for decades to come. Our last technology is synthetic biology, and that's where you take alter the DNA or introduce DNA into an organism so that you can get it to make the things that you want. It's an engineering approach to biology. And one of these companies called Orf Genetics in Iceland, they make what's called growth factors. They used to make human growth factors, which were used in cosmetics. Now they make growth factors for growing other cellular agriculture products, so like cultivated meat, even things like our California cultured chocolate. But my favourite application of synthetic biology is something called plant molecular farming, where what you do is you take the gene for the compound you want, you put it into a plant like a soybean, you then grow the soybean, in this case Nobel Foods here, you take the casein out to make cheese, and you then process the rest of the soybean. You can make cheese, make animal products without the animal. And we talked about briefly the huge resource usage that we have at the moment to get the yields that we need. As we've seen with the current geopolitical problems, shipping nitrogen is a huge problem to drive the yields we need to feed the global population. This company called Pivot Bio, they have a genetically altered soil microorganism. They spray that on the crops and it can reduce the resource usage of nitrogen by 44 kilos a hectare. That may not sound right, but when you consider the millions and millions of hectares of farmland that we have, that is a huge decrease in the resources required to make our food. And of course, now we get to our accelerators, and no talk would be complete without talking about AI. We talked about that this morning. AI is simply the most influential technology of the last 20 years, whether in food or anything else. It's going to enable us to scale these technologies we've talked about rapidly so that we can feed the ever-increasing global population. And using these new technologies enables us to create a healthier planet by producing food more sustainably and also avoiding many of these huge resource issues that we have with the current global food system. And they can do this by, firstly, using less resources and producing less pollution. Secondly, they can also be grown locally, which means that we reduce supply chains and reduce the opportunity for food waste. Thirdly, by manufacturing products locally, countries that can't actually produce much food can have a greater certainty or food sovereignty in their supply chain. And last, but by no means least, they'll reduce our reliance on the twin limitations of food production, and that is arable land and fresh water that we talked about before. If you have lots of arable land and lots of fresh water, you have lots of food. If you have less arable land, less fresh water, you have less food. So if we can decouple a lot of the food production in the world from those twin limitations, I call them the twin tyrannies of global food production, then we can actually grow food within planetary boundaries. And that brings us back to our crossroads choice. And yes, there are other things that we can do. People talk about food waste and, hey, we make enough food in the world, let's just redistribute it. For many reasons, I don't think those are going to happen nearly fast enough given what we're seeing in the world. So what we need to do is to reimagine our global food system using technologies. And why do we need technologies? Because we cannot solve today's problems using yesterday's technologies. And don't believe the doomsayers who say we're all going to burn or there will never be enough food, we'll all starve. Don't listen to them. We can create a world of food abundance within planetary boundaries. And there are enormous opportunities. As you've seen from some of those technologies, you can be anything from a synthetic biologist, a biochemist, you could be a microbiologist, an AI programmer. There are an enormous number of opportunities to be involved in feeding the planet. Because feeding the planet is the single most important challenge for our species. If you don't eat or you don't drink, you die. So solving this challenge is something that is really, really worthwhile doing. And as I said, you can be involved in so many different ways. So you can get involved in everything from, as I said, computing to biology. The opportunities are endless. So you can be involved in reimagining our global food system to sustainably, healthily, and fairly feed our growing global population. And in the process, invent the future of our space station planet. Thank you.